I think maybe we've become an oddity, but we weren't.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? Like it was never. Well, it took someone else to point out to us that we weren't.
If we weren't on the same page with that, it just wouldn't work.
Get to a certain verse, you're rolling your eyes on stage. This thing again.
We've talked about other situations, and where we've been like,
when a message was injected into the music, it all of a sudden came to life for me, and like the light bulb went off for me, and like this was the stuff that.
I first discovered this band many, many years ago with their album called Revolutions Per Minute. It was a song called Heaven Knows, which particularly stood out to me. Not only did it have excellent high-energy punk rock sound to it, but there was a massive, drastic tempo change towards the end, which totally changed the gravitas of that song. And it's become a signature that I've enjoyed from this band over the years. Now, they're in the UK. They're about to embark on a tour of the EU and the UK as well, and they released a new single for the first time in 3 years. So I'm delighted to have a chance now to talk to Tim and Zach from Rise Against about the band and where they're at right now. Now, before we get into Nod, the most recent song, I'd love to find out a bit more about those tempo changes you have in your music, because I wonder, is it something when you're writing a song, you're trying to figure out the puzzle of what is the next section? Is that one of the tools that early on you went, what if we completely change this and how might that work? Or is it just, how do we keep this fresh or interesting? Because it seems to be something you do fairly regularly through your songs.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like it's very organic, so we're just sort of putting the pieces of the song together and reacting and responding to the way it makes us feel, like, because the song is something that's in your head first, and then like it's in your hands and an instrument, and then that might sound different, and then when you get into a room with different personalities, now it's something totally different, and sometimes it's different bad, you know what I mean, and sometimes it's different good, and sometimes it's different like so much better than I heard it like in my head, you know what I mean, and sometimes I feel like we will kind of play a part where we're just sort of teasing it out and seeing where it goes. And sometimes we find places like that part in Heaven Knows, you know what I mean? Where that might be a part that we discovered like many more minutes into like playing the song than it should have been. But we got to that part maybe and we're like, oh, well, this actually makes it sound really cool. This is a cool element to this song that it doesn't have yet. And then I feel like that then makes a Rise Against song, so it doesn't, we don't want it to just hit you flat. From start to finish. It would be great if like we can take you a little bit on a journey. Kind
of subvert expectations a bit, because punk rock can be very like 4/4, start to finish, let's go. And that gives you something more interesting, and you can, certainly in your songs as well, there's a lyrical storytelling that usually matches those moments.
Well, he's a guy that will bring in a song with lyrics and things like that, and Ed's a guy that, he brings the song in and he goes, well, okay, now this part has a different mood. So then I know there's probably going to be a tempo change at that point, as well. So like, let's get under it. What are we going to do? It's always exciting.
You're hinting there that there's a very collaborative songwriting process, because if you're working on something, you can kind of tease it in the rehearsal room. Is that generally the case of how you prefer to write? Or in the modern day of like recording at home and sending things over the internet, is it a bit more kind of, less in the room natural? Or
It's collaborative, like in the sense that like there's no other way that it's gonna happen with our band, because even if I brought in a song, like I said, that I heard in my head, and now it's like, here's the whole thing. Like by the time like the other three guys touch it, you know what I mean? It's different. Like they're not just robots that are just gonna be like, okay, here it is. You know what I mean? Like they all have their own personality. So it's like there's no other option. You know what I mean? Like we all have our own take on each of our instrument, our own feel, and that's kind of what makes up Rise Against. So by the time everyone hears it, it's like, okay, this is a Rise Against song. Yeah.
We're very lucky that we have a drummer in Brandon Barnes, the way he plays drums. And I remember coming into the band, since I joined, after the fact, playing songs with him, in my first rehearsal with him, and what Tim said, how everyone played. And from the record, you really didn't, now I'm in the room and I'm in it with them, and now I need to find my own place. That was really interesting, and it made me love and respect the band so much more. It's like, oh wow, this is how this band sounds. That was interesting. I was trying to find my own place there.
Right. Yeah, because especially I don't know if you use a click live or not, but I imagine it would present very difficult problems if you're trying to change tempo. A click could do that, but I guess there's the fun danger element of in a song like The Prayer of the Refugee, when you have to go faster for that chorus bit. You shook your head a little bit, so there's no click live, I'm imagining. So then you've got like 3 beats from his vocal before the chorus to know what tempo he's thinking of for that. Or how consistent can you make that? And there are the times when you have in your head with the adrenaline, okay, this is what I want to go into, and the rest of them going, okay then.
These are good crushes, by the way.
Yeah, they are, yeah.
These are great.
I mean, it's interesting. So the answer is there is no click at a Rise Against show, and so people, like, especially in a world that we live in now, there's more of implementation of like tracks and that kind of thing. And so people ask us if we do it. We're actually not even capable of doing it if we wanted to, because we don't play to a click. So like we couldn't add them a runner. And here's the thing too, like I don't have any principled stand against click, you know what I mean? I don't have any principled stand against using tracks. Like I think it's cool. I think it's like it makes some shows amazing, you know what I mean? Like I think like if you are presenting your song in a cool way and the people are responding to it, you know, whether you're Minor Threat or Nine Inch Nails, like I love all these bands, you know, but we don't. And I think that's kind of, I think maybe we've become an oddity, but we weren't.
That's a good way to put it.
Right? Like it was never, it took someone else to point out to us that we weren't using tracks and that other bands at this festival were, and we're like, wait, when did that all start happening? You know what I mean? Like, and so we just did things, we've done things the way we've always done them, and that was what every band from our scene was doing when we started. And now that, like, it's giving us reason to think and reflect on it. Like, well, this is something we should be doing. Is what's happening out there. I think we start to appreciate the organic nature of what we do. And to answer your question in a long way, our tempos will change. You know what I mean? Like, it might be different tomorrow night than it was the night before. You know what I mean? Like, the room will change it. Our energy will change it. You know what I mean? Like, and we're just kind of reading each other, playing it. And not even noticing, you know what I mean? Just like, this is what this feels like this should be doing right now, you know?
That's very cool.
On an organic level, I've even noticed in watching our live, footage and stuff, that we look at each other more than other bands nowadays, because you don't have to if you have it in your ear, and you're going to change. Everybody knows they're going to change. I find I'm looking at our drummer or our bassist or Tim, and we've also played together so much, we just innately know when this guy's going to be doing it. But I wouldn't want to do it any other way, you know?
I've never thought about that aspect. It might be a slight coldness to, if you're getting it all on your click, you don't really look at each other and kind of take in the moment, like, hey, look at this crowd.
That's
yeah, there are parts in the set where I need to see what Zach's doing or what Joe's doing, or especially what Brandon's doing, so I have to stop and, like, and that we have that sort of unspoken, like, hey, I'm just going to look to you, and so we're on. And it's like, yeah, cool, I got you.
There's a lot of cues on our stage.
Yeah.
But that's without a click, you'd have to have them somehow.
Totally, yeah.
And honestly, like, to his point, I didn't realize we were such an anomaly until we had people start working for us, going on tour with us that had worked with other bands that are like, well, you guys aren't on tracks. You're not on, and thinking that was so odd. We were like, other bands do that,
Yeah.
I guess if you're trying to sync up to a big visual video, then this all timed, maybe that kind of makes sense. But when I do notice bands that don't use it, I'm immediately way more impressed with the drummer, because it's so on them to keep that tempo right.
Absolutely.
And rushing is the normal, natural thing to do with adrenaline, but a good drummer can keep it at the right pace. Just
Yeah.
Very cool. Now, your most recent song, Nod, one thing I loved about that in particular was, and I want to know if this was intentional, at the end of the chorus, you have the line saying, like, nod if you understand me. And then it goes into a section which is impossible not to nod along with, because it is this tempo you can't help but headbang.
Yeah.
So what you're going to do is you're going to play this, and you have 1,000 people in the crowd, all basically nodding and say, yes, I understand you. Is that the intention, to look at each other like, we're all on the same page?
I think that was kind of a happy accident. Yeah, for sure. I don't think we thought that one out, but it's. I know the moment you're talking about, and it's a cool moment. I think when you hit somebody with a chorus like that, you have to build in like a breather before you start the next verse. You know what I mean? Like, it's close to like that's like that boom, 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 boom. It's like it had to have that moment. But you're right, and it'll be something that hopefully people nod to.
No doubt. Yeah, that section reminded me a little bit. I don't know if this is incidental or not, but of like Pink Floyd's the wall, the brick in the wall. It has that kind of that
I can see
tempo
that.
to it.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like menacing a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
I mean, so you haven't released a song for about 3 years. What's happened in that gap, kind of musically for yourselves?
So we put out Nowhere Generation right in like a post-COVID world, and so it just took us a long time to get to all the corners of the world that we were trying to get to, you know, including here in London. And so I feel like that was not as conventional of like a touring cycle, you know. It just was like it went for longer, and it just took us a minute to get to everybody, and then we just took time off, went home, and just started like basically putting new ideas together for the next chapter. But we didn't feel any like real rush to do that. We kind of did it like when we felt like it was ready. We felt like we were ready, and we felt like hungry to get back at it, you know. Because I think this is our 10th record, and I feel like so we've done like that means that we've done 9 album cycles. You know what I mean? Like 9 different like worldwide tours, and each one has been a little bit different. But there's been some in there where I feel like we, it's almost like scheduled ourselves like back-to-back album cycles, you know, and like put pressure on ourselves. And when that happens, like you don't walk back into the studio hungry. You walk back in the studio like, oh, here we are. You know what I mean?
I'm on the block for 10 songs at least.
Yeah, totally. And so now I think with you have to kind of like get inspired and like recharge your batteries, and then hopefully when you go back into the studio and back on tour, it's because you're just itching to do it. You know what I mean? Not because someone's dragging you up to do it.
Certainly, for your band, lyrically, there's a lot of kind of like activism, looking at the world, how can we do better? So in order to deliver that fire in the studio, you need to kind of feel a little bit of that itch as well, perhaps. Did you find during that time there were things you wanted to write music about, you wanted to kind of speak out, but then would you write during that time and save them for the studio for later? How do you keep on the pulse of things you want to?
Yeah, it's tricky because the world moves so fast, you know what I mean? And like certainly in songwriting and release, like when you write a song, like its inception to when it actually is released, the world could be a whole different place. And it certainly has been the story of a lot of our records. I'd like to think that a lot of the Rise Against like themes are sort of timeless in that way. You know what I mean? We're talking about change and awareness and struggle and despair and dark times and bright times and overcoming adversity and the challenges that come along with that. And those kind of demons that rise against battles are like kind of timeless, you know? And so sometimes it's a surprise to me to see the song come out and the kind of like the world that it comes out in is not a world that maybe I anticipated, you know what I mean? But like all of a sudden it makes even more sense at the time, you know? It's like even like a song like Nod, it wrote it like almost a year ago. I didn't anticipate the tumultuousness of this week, you know what I mean? Certainly in the country we call home. And it makes me look at it in like a different filter, like, oh, this song is about the solace that we find in community when we look to each other. And I feel like that's what a lot of people are doing. A lot of people who see what's happening and like me look at it as like a pause on progress in America. You know what I mean? If not like a total regression, you know? And it's a moment where we're kind of regrouping. You know what I mean? Like, okay, this is the world that we are walking into. Let's look at it, accept it, you know what I mean, for what it is at this moment, and now start to like draw up plans for like what next week looks like, or what next year looks like. And I think that Nod is that you can't build that tomorrow until you see who your allies are. You know what I mean? And Nod is about kind of nodding to everybody, being like, all right, are we in this? Are we doing this? You know what I mean? Are you with me? You know what I mean? And nodding is this reminder that like, yes, I'm with you, you know?
Yeah. I know also you can't move forward if you don't have an understanding of where you currently are.
Right, and I think that's what's happening. Like there's sort of like this an education happening in the States and maybe around the world where we're starting to realize why it's imperative that we stay vigilant as citizens. So something like the rise of like an alt-right or a Donald Trump can't ever happen again, because that's a little bit of everybody's fault. If a person like that gets to power, like somebody was not on their watch, you know what I mean? And so now we sort of figure out why this happened and what we do to not be there again.
How much of that, the lyrical messaging for the band, is entirely from yourself as the lead vocalist, or is it a collective thing? Does everyone in the band, I suppose, potentially need to stand behind everything that's said in a sort of unified thing? Otherwise, it might be tricky.
Lyrically, he is the lyricist. But I think for it to work in our band, especially since the lyrics do have messages that do have political beliefs, we're all on the same page. You know what I mean? And I trust him implicitly. If he's saying something, you know, he also has everybody's best interest at heart. But if we weren't on the same page with that, it just wouldn't work.
Get to a certain verse, you're rolling your eyes on stage. This thing again.
We've talked about other situations, and you know, where we've been like, you know, where certain bands where we know for a fact they politically are on different levels, and it's like, how does that work? You know, because not only do you have to back what the guy's saying, you know, speaking for your band, you're in a bus with him, you know, you're backstage with this guy. But no, I mean, he's going to be so much more eloquent than I would ever be as well, and say things that I wanted to say or I am wanting to say. And having him as a mouthpiece is, I should be so lucky. So but he is.
I think we are lucky in that sense. Like there were no hard fast rules to being in Rise Against. It wasn't like you must tick these boxes. You know what I mean? We started this band very young. You know what I mean? And we kind of all grew up together in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? I saw a lot of world events unfold together from the same van, from the same dressing room. And we've filtered a lot of those things in the same ways and see them through a similar lens. And I'm sure there are nuances to like our beliefs, but for the most part, like I think like I appreciate that these guys trust me with these songs, and I never take that trust for granted.
Yeah.
Is that something that was a key part of what started Rise Against? Kind of the messaging of it was going to be a key part of it, or was it more we're going to put a punk band together and then what are we on about? Oh, actually, I'm interested in this. Like, what was there a chicken egg scenario there?
Right. Yeah. There was never we never drew up a battle plan for Rise Against what we were going to do. It was all.
But we call it Rise Against. What do we rise against? What is the?
Honestly, the name helped in a lot of ways because it's such a bold thing to do to name your band Rise Against. You know what I mean? It's like you just created some pretty big shoes. You know what I mean? So are you going to fill them? You know what I mean? So I think it helped shape us a little bit. But back then I was tasked with being the singer and writing all the lyrics, you know what I mean? And so when you are asked to put pen to paper, you are ideally writing down something that you are passionate about, whatever you are most passionate about at that moment, because you're being asked to put that into song, and then you're being asked to communicate that to a crowd and really stand behind all of those things. And so music has always been interesting to me. I've always liked music, but it really was politics were never an afterthought with music. Like the music that had a message was what really triggered my interest in music. Music was sort of like a passive thing for me until I heard bands like Minor Threat, you know what I mean? Until I heard like Rage Against the Machine, like until I heard like the hardcore bands that I grew up on. A lot of like the even like the vegan straight edge scene. Like when a message was injected into the music, it all of a sudden came to life for me, and like the light bulb went off for me, and like this was the stuff that that made it interesting to me. And so in some ways, I think you'll talk to musicians who like were musicians first, and then when they had a platform, their politics became like, oh, I feel a responsibility to communicate this thing. Yeah. It's like the cart before the horse, or horse before the cart, whatever. But like for me, it always went together. You know what I mean? And it wasn't a conscious thing. It was like I'm just simply being asked to sing about what I care most about, and this is what I care most about. And then putting it out there, it found an audience, and then I realized there was an audience that also cared about these things too, and that helped me feel less alone also. Yeah,
that makes sense. And it's also something that's kind of synonymous with, certainly more maybe back in the day, but the punk rock scene is like about kind of, against authority, like speak up for those who are forgotten or marginalized. It's kind of a powerful thing. But also what helps that messaging land and the sort of call to arms of it is the harshness of some of the vocal deliveries. But then you also have these glorious choruses with like backing vocal 3-part harmonies and things. Was that something that happened organically at the beginning and you've kind of continued from there? Or is that, because you could just become, like State of the Union, for example, is a pretty harsh song from start to finish, but that's a rarity, I think, within your catalog. A lot of them more have big sing-along choruses. Where do you see the balance in the harmony aspect of your songs?
Good question.
Yeah, I think as we grew up as a band, we started to start on a better understanding of what we were capable of, you know? And so when you hear our first record, you hear what 4 guys thought they were capable of, you know what I mean? Like, we could do this, you know? And then maybe you saw moments, or we heard moments where it's like, oh, this was a cool sound that we explored. And then like also maybe an audience reacted to this. And then when we took this to, like, on tour, we saw which things felt good playing live and what things like really really people like kind of identified with. And then every time you do that, every time you go on tour, every time you hit a festival stage or whatever, you take something away from that, you know, you realize like, this thing worked really well, this didn't work so well. And then you go back and you write another record, you know? And I feel like that's the story of Rise Against. Like, every time we wrote a record, took it on the road, we came away from those tours and those records with lessons about how to make the next one even better, or what we wanted out of it, you know? And then it became like an evolution in that sense. I thought every record we made was the best record we were ever gonna make, you know what I mean? Like, when we did the first one, I was like, it's never gonna get better than this. And when the second one, I was like, well, it'll never get better than this, you know what I mean? And then we kind of just like, we found ourselves in the music. And I was really happy that like our band was not like, we were not an overnight success, you know what I mean? And I'm really happy because I think we were able to sort of exist and grow in like the shadows a little bit. You know what I mean? Instead of the world being like debuted Rise Against on like a Saturday Night Live in like 2002, you would have seen a really raw, scrappy band. You know what I mean? We were able to kind of exist in this punk and hardcore scene and just grow and have that scene kind of cultivate us. And so by the time we got to bigger stages, we were more ready for it.
Right. I've never really considered that before, because I remember like 2 decades ago, we were seeing bands on like Jimmy Kimmel or something. It's like, oh, great, there's a rock band on TV. And it's like, it doesn't sound great. And it might be because it's their 5th gig. And it's like, come on.
I know. I think it was one of the best things that happened to us is that there was not an overnight success. You know, we spent 2 records on an independent label. You know what I mean? The rest of them, you know, they were never number 1 hit singles that like catapulted us into this. It was a very slow build. And like, at the time, it might even be frustrating to a young musician to be like, why can't we really, you know? But I look back and I'm like, I'm so happy that it happened just the way it happened, because by the time like some version of a spotlight rolled around to us, we were way more ready for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You were hinting there that you take things away from performing live and that informs your next bit of songwriting. Is that in a way that you're interested in writing songs for live? Or there's a balance like this one, I care about this as a recording first and then live will figure it out? Or do you think about that in that process?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, like it's got to feel good in the studio. It's got to feel good live, you know what I mean? But live is the true test of it, you know what I mean? Like, did this idea that you tried to communicate, you know, in a studio, and what can be like a sterile environment of a studio, does it translate to like a stage and to a crowd, you know? And it doesn't always, you know what I mean? But when it does, like when you can really dig into it, and then when the crowd really responds, you know, you've kind of cracked the code, you know?
And there's been songs that we didn't think about playing live, that we just started playing live because we liked it, and it became a fan favorite. It became something that we kind of needed to start playing at every gig from then on out. But yeah, like he said, there's songs where we're like, oh, this is going to go over great. And we'll play it, and it's just, you know, and it's our crowd.
The audience will tell you.
That, you know, we're like, wow, that did not go well, you know.
Yeah.
They'll tell you. They'll tell you.
I'm a huge fan of a woah-oh in a song. And I'm thinking of like...
You came to the right place.
Yeah, I mean, Savior has an excellent woah-oh in that one. But I always kind of wonder about the songwriting part of it. It's like, that must be a melody that you hear, and you could choose to put lyrics in there.
Right.
But when you go like, that must be a big moment where if the crowd's going, that's a big woah-oh moment. The crowd's going to call back to you on that one. When do you go, can we do a whoa here? Or should we do a lyric?
Also a good question.
Yeah, it's always like off the cuff. It's always like kind of like maybe an afterthought. I think like it's a very I don't know what the word is, like an add-on kind of part, like almost like an improv part that just happens when in the songwriting process, you know. And then because there's probably a lot of them that like don't stay in the song, you know what I mean?
Right.
But then some of them, when you're like, oh wait, I think that kind of works there, you know what I mean? Then it ends up just working.
he also has a superpower of something we've talked about a few times, and we call it a fricascena, where if somebody, you have a riff and you're playing it, and he'll immediately, almost immediately start singing something that sounds like lyrics. Mm-hmm. And he'll do placeholder words and sometimes he will just placeholder a woah-oh. And it's like, no, don't sing a lyric there. That worked, so it's happened that way as well,
I guess, yeah, if you can't beat the woah-oh with the line,
sure.
you keep it.
Right,
sure.
totally, yeah. And like a woah is like, that's your body being like the instrument and just reacting to the music. It's literally just something that's coming out of you, you know what I mean? And that's an instinct you should trust.
Absolutely.
Something very organic about it, and it'll work internationally. You don't have to understand the lyrics.
Yeah, sure.
Totally, yeah. Those parts are the kind of thing where you don't feel like you're even writing it. Like it's writing itself. It's coming from somewhere else,
And think of the history of rock and roll music, how many woes are in certain parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
True.
That'd be an interesting study to see with the first woe, in recorded music. When was the first woe?
Mm-hmm. There's a content idea. I'm going to do some research. I'll figure it out. Make a whole video on it. Nice. One of the things that I think is amazing about the energy that comes out of your band, especially in terms of the vocals, is your scream vocal sound is almost metal-like. It's a bit harsh. Like State of the Union, as I mentioned before, is unhinged. Mm-hmm. When did you discover that you had that? Was that just a case of like amping yourself up in the studio and go like, oh, maybe I can go to another level? Or is it something you've learned to do particularly?
It helped me. So I really got into like the hardcore scene. When I say hardcore scene, it would mean like bands like Earth Crisis were important to me, Snapcase, like Integrity, like Turmoil. I grew up on metal like Sepultura, or I love things like In Flames. I love Killswitch Engage. You know what I mean? Like I like like metal music. Like Zach knows this too. Mm-hmm. That was a lot of my adolescence, was just like mosh pits and X'd up hands. You know what I mean? Like the whole thing. Like I was all about like late '90s victory.
We're in East London. It's a good time.
Yeah, right. I love it. Late '90s like Victory Records like style, like hardcore. Was a big deal to me. I never saw myself as one of those guys, you know what I mean? Like one of those singers with those voices. But around that time, I remember starting a hardcore band with some friends, and just sort of like learning how to scream. Learning is like a formal word for what I was doing, you know what I mean? But like just kind of figuring out a little bit more. And I feel like that helped me be more ready for Rise Against when it happened. Because I feel like at that point I had a couple different weapons in my holster that I could like pull out, because sometimes the music calls for a scream.
As a guy playing with him, I've never been more proud when we've played on festivals with metal bands, because we have a heavier side of us as well. So we're lucky enough that we get to do not just Punk Fest or whatever, and where like known reputable metal bands have come to him and been like, man, have you ever thought about singing metal? And I'm just like, just like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, I've seen you play. I'm sure it's main stage at Download Festival, like a huge crowd, kind of. Slot in perfectly well there. But then equally within the range of the sound that can come out of Rise Against, you've got Swing Life Away, which is the total other end of the spectrum.
Right.
It's great that you have that kind of expression. I remember that happened at a time where a lot of punk bands were like, oh, we'll do a token-like acoustic song. And then yours came out. It was such a, I think, refined level of layering of acoustic with it. It kind of really kind of cut through and captured people's attention.
Yeah, I think that came from not setting a lot of rules to what we wanted to do as a band. You know what I mean? I came from like a hardcore scene. Joe came from like a pop punk scene with his old band, and we came together, and there were no more rules anymore. You know what I mean? Like it was like we could just do whatever. And like a song like Swing Life Away, I just wrote with no like receptacle for it at all. It was there was no I wasn't planning on putting it anywhere. You know what I mean? And then next thing you know, it just kind of materialized on a record and became like a part of our canon. But the most fun part about playing in a band like Rise Against is that versatility, that we get invited to like really cool festivals on all sides of the coin. So like you can bring us to a sonosphere with the big four metal bands, you know what I mean, with Metallica, McIlrath and Anthrax. Like we can do those things, and we have done those things.
Yes, we have.
And then you can bring us to when we were young in Vegas, and we'll play with a lot of pop punk bands that did all their Warped Tour in the mid 2000s. And then you can bring us to the Radio Rock Fest, you know what I mean, with like whatever those bands are, you know what I mean, like and we can kind of find our slot in there, and that's, I think, it makes it fun for us because we're not just doing one thing.
Absolutely. Something I've always been thankful for, because it just gets so boring if you're just one thing. Then you just go to one festival and you're just the one, So for us being able to get asked and having our slot, and having fitting in it's always been something I'm very, very thankful for.
And certainly if you have messaging, you want as many people as possible to hear it, then if you can go into lots of different environments and give that message, that's very useful.
And that's what's fun too, yeah. And even like, I bring up Sonosphere, and when we showed up, it was a very metal bill, you know what I mean? And we felt a little out of place, and those are the festivals we walk into maybe a little bit, like with a little bit of trepidation. But then you realize like, oh, you're the one band that stands out a little bit here, and people appreciate that. You know what I mean? Like they actually pay a little more attention to your band because they've been watching bands of the same genre all day. You know what I mean? We're all great, but then you're like standing out is a good thing. You know what I mean? In that sense. So, and we oftentimes stand out at a lot of the shows that we play.
Great. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I suppose perhaps as we wrap up here, the world's a difficult place, but then it always is. What gives you folks hope in the difficult times? Honestly, because if you're every night you're thinking about like the difficulties of the world, like what kind of keeps you going in it?
Oh man,
I would say it's going back to our new song "Nod," like the nod if you understand me. Like we get like that nod can be a lot of different things. Like it means like the way we signal to each other that we're on the same page. You know what I mean? But we get nods every night. You know what I mean? Like in that fan base and that community around the world, that gives me hope, that people are connecting with these songs, they're on their own journey with these songs, and I hope that we're making them feel less alone. They definitely make us feel less alone. You can't help but see that sort of hope in the eyes of and the voices of all these people that are in front of you every night. So we're very lucky in that sense that we have that sort of like that hope springs eternal, like every single night we get to go on stage. And then I try to share that with the audience too, like, hey, I get this view, I get this perspective, like I get to be here tonight and somewhere else tonight, but I want you to know, like, there's more of you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm here to tell you, like, there's people, they were in the last town, they'll be in the next town, they'll be in the next country, And so that's the stuff where you sort of, that you bring with you to help kind of, brighten up dark times. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I haven't really considered that before. You're in a unique position to see the many thousands of people who are in agreement or want to hear your message, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of times I need that. I need to go see that every night because at least in America right now, it's feeling hopeless. You can have those dark times. And for us getting the unique perspective to come out and do this and to see that on a nightly basis, it's like, okay, God, at least,
Well, you've got that coming up because you're about to tour Europe and the UK. So best of luck with that. I'm sure it'll go nice and smooth for yourselves. And look forward to more music, hopefully at some point in the future. Thank you very much again for your time. It's been a joy to chat to you about your songwriting and the rest.
Yeah, cheers. Our pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, man.
Well, that was a pretty cool moment there. I was so stoked to have the chance to talk to Tim and Zach from Rise Against, a band I've been a fan of for so many years. Really cool to hear some of the insights behind their songwriting. I'll make sure to add some links in the description of this episode, as I usually do, to the Rise Against social media accounts so you can keep up to date with that band's gigs and music in future. If you haven't yet, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast as well. There's plenty more interviews coming with some amazing rock musicians in future. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully I'll see you in another episode very soon.